Welcome to Let's Talk Ball. I'm Pat Brown along with Carl Jones. It's been a while since we've been get together. It is the off season for NFL players and also NFL broadcasters too, who get some time to enjoy getting away from the job life. But now the draft is this week. And Carl, I gotta say, look, the draft is awesome. I know some people may not be into it. They think it's another traditional NFL overhyping of something that isn't a game. But generally, I like this event. It's fun. It's fun to study these guys, see where they go. But I gotta admit, I am not nearly as excited for this draft as I have been in other years because in a lot of cases, this draft has been called a meat and potatoes draft. There's a lot of solid starters. I mean, maybe 100 of those guys, but not many stars. And even especially when you cover a team that's going to pick at 30, Carl, I just cannot get jacked up for this weekend.
See, I'm jacked up, and you know the reason why I'm jacked up. The Bills need a cornerback. So, like, for the past 3 months, I've been just watching dudes from what random FCS schools, seeing if they can turn their hips and run a little bit. No, but with the general consensus, I agree with you on that. I don't think that you're going to get a player at 30 who you think will have maybe Pro Bowl potential. So maybe you're going to shoot for a single or a double as opposed to aiming for the fences with a home run. Like, there are players in this draft who have ungodly traits, but they haven't produced at all at the collegiate level. So you don't really see the one-to-one of that transition into the NFL. But I would agree with that assessment as well. Even at the top of the draft as well, I think there are maybe like 5 or 6 players who I feel comfortable saying would even be Pro Bowl level players, let alone all pro.
Brandon Beane said in his pre-draft press conference that he did not have first 30 players with a first round grade. I don't even know if they have 15, to be honest. I don't know if we get that far. But to your point, despite the lack of home run hitters, man, there are gappers left and right in this draft. I mean, you could throw a stone and hit 5 of them. And we're going to talk about that a little today. What we're going to do is we're going to go through for day 1 and day 2 with the Bills a best and worst case scenario. What happens if everything goes bad? And what would be the ideal from our point of views? And then we'll talk about for both days also a potential surprise for the Bills. And we'll do a little bit of a trade lightning round at the end of this. So let's start right with day 1, round 1. Bills pick at 30. What would be the best case scenario? And Carl, I'll let you lead off here.
The best case scenario would be, I want to paint the picture for everyone so they can understand how we get to this point, would be all of those teams in the teens get obsessed with the tackles. So there's a run on the offensive tackles, excuse me. So whether it's your Josh Simmons, they feel comfortable with his medicals, whether it's a player like a Josh Connerly from Oregon, like all these guys just get pushed up the board because of the premium position that they play, as well as receiver. Matthew Golden goes earlier than you expect, maybe even a Luther Burden or Emeka Ibuka. And that pushes some of the more defensive prospects that the Bills will covet down the list a little bit. So sitting there at 30, you would have your chance of maybe one of the 4 top defensive tackles, as well as maybe not one of the top 3 corners, but my 4th favorite corner who will be available there as well. So in an ideal scenario, it will be one of Mason Graham's not going to be there, Derek Harmon, Kenneth Grant, and/or Walter Nolan. And then, God forbid, these medicals with Will Johnson are that bad, but like him, as well as a Trey Amos out of Ole Miss.
I know you've been talking about the Johnson potential, about him falling. And, I remember I studied him weeks ago and wrote some stuff about him and thought, I'm never going to use this again because he's going top 10. The Bills are not going to have a chance to touch him. I still don't think the Bills landed.
Right.
But how close do you think we are to Buffalo being in a reasonable trade position? And maybe the better question is, if you're Brandon Beane, how much of the rest of the draft fortune you have, because the Bills do have a lot of picks, would you mortgage to go how high to maybe grab him?
I don't want to, and maybe this is my hot take of the day. I don't think he goes top 15, ignoring the knee concerns, because usually top 15 cornerbacks are athletic freaks. Like, those are your guys who test very, very well. Like, I remember when Pat Surtain went top 10, if I'm not mistaken, behind J.C. Horn, it was still a bit of a question mark because people didn't like the way he tested. Now, obviously, he ended up being a great player, but people go for traits over production at the cornerback position high end in the draft. So I wouldn't be surprised if once you get to Arizona at 16 that he's still on the board there. But if he's on the board at 20 with the Denver Broncos, who don't need an outside cornerback, I think you start calling to see if what the trade looks like. Because if I'm not mistaken, when the Chiefs went up to go get Trent McDuffie, it was 29-21. So around the same realm of trade value right there. Because right after the Denver Broncos, the Steelers need a cornerback. So the Chargers, the Packers need one as soon as they trade Jair Alexander. those are going to be some cornerback needy teams who will see Will Johnson sticking out like a sore thumb, just like the Buffalo Bills. So if you're the Bills, I would feel comfortable giving up your one. You would probably have to give up the 62 because if I'm not mistaken, the Chiefs gave up a 1, a 3, and a 4 to
So I got it right here. It was 29 and 21, like you said, and they got 29. They got a third. The Patriots did, and a fourth. So it was a 1, a 3, and a 4 to move from 29 to 21. With the one being the pick you're moving up from. So really, you paid a third and a fourth to go up there. Now the Bills don't have a third.
Right.
They've got multiple fourths. So if you want to make that same deal. And look, I don't want to get bogged down in the discussion of what everything would cost, but that's what it cost 3 years ago for that trade.
I will feel comfortable doing that because he's an imperfect prospect, just like any player outside of the top 5. But his skill set in terms of how well he plays zone coverage would fit like a glove in Buffalo. But I, once again, am not even thinking that's a remote possibility because I do think some team between 16 and 20 are going to see the same thing the Bills think and go attack him.
And he can fly too. And Brandon Beane always talks about the fact that if you can add speed. And that's a guy that would instantly provide that, especially in the secondary where the Bills haven't had a lot of it. If you do want to think about, moving up to pick 16, now you're talking about giving up one of your 2s. And even though the Bills have a ton of picks, I don't think I want to trade either one of the 2s for the guys who are likely to be available to the Bills in the 15-16 range. You don't have the studs. If you could go up and get Abdul Carter with 1-2, sure, but you ain't doing that this year,
Right.
And again, I guess to just get in the weeds a little bit, the general thinking is that most teams are not going to want to go up because the guy you're going to get number 10 is virtually the same as the guy you're getting at 30 or even 50. So moving down is the play. Now for the Bills, because they have so many picks, maybe you overspend to go up and get a guy you like. And let me seg this in right to my ideal scenario, my best case. To me, it's trading up for an edge rusher. I've gone through a couple versions of this. I love Kenneth Grant. For weeks, I've been thinking the Bills letting Kenneth Grant fall to them at 30 and taking a guy who's fills a big need, a one technique tackle who has big time upside because of the athletic profile. That to me is the best case. But the more I thought about it, you can get better or at least more similar D tackles in rounds 2, maybe even early in round 4 where the Bills' 4th pick is. Now with the edges, look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Shamar Stewart is any crazy better than Landon Jackson, is any crazy better than Mikael Williams. But I do see with a Stewart or a Pierce, maybe if you want to go there, there are some of the, Mike Green is another one production-wise. Some of these guys have either traits or in Green's case, production that is so elite that I can understand wanting to trade up and take a swing with that. Now, again, the big argument I have with this, I want to throw this at you too. How badly does Brandon Beane need a win in round 1? Because you go back through his round 1 pick since like the Tremaine Edmonds, Josh Allen masterpiece, it's pretty much Greg Rousseau and a bunch of whiffs. And if you go for an edge, whether you trade up for them or not, the bust potential is high. That is a big swing. Whereas with these defensive tackles, I could close my eyes and pick one, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to get a solid starter. So, how badly, Carl, do you think the Bills need to hit on a round 1 pick? And I don't mean hit a homer, but at least get the ball through the infield.
I think this player, whoever they choose with their first pick, because if they trade back, then it's not a first round pick anymore. The player needs to be at least a double because we've talked about this ad nauseum. The Bills' issue isn't 10 through 53 on their roster. It's 1 through 9. And when you bring in an edge rusher, you pray that your first round edge rusher fits that 1 through 9 category on your team. The issue is at their premium positions, those players aren't up to par across the rest of the league in terms of the S tier or even A tier quality of players. So yeah, if you do take an edge rusher that you go up to get, he has to be an 8 to 9 plus guy sack off the edge that will help this team go forward in the postseason because division titles aren't their issue. They can win division titles because their 10 through 53 is just as good as anyone in the National Football League. It's just that when they get to the dance at the end of the night, 1 through 9, they don't stack up as well as with the Chiefs, Eagles, all the other teams.
And I can't agree with that more. And to me, that's why I ended up going with trading up for an edge, because to me, the edges, at least at the top 4 to 5 to 6 of this class, are the guys who are way more likely to end up as an 8 or a 9 or a star player. Whereas you look at these D tackles after Mason Graham, and you might even put Mason Graham in this category. I don't know if any of them do I feel confident they will end up at that level. I think there's a good chance they're not going to be worse than a 5, but to be a 9 on a 10, I think you got to take your big swing with the edge. All right, let's move on to the worst case scenario for round 1. You can kind of play this out however you want, whether it's they have to pick this guy or a position. What's the disastrous scenario for the Bills in round 1, and how do they manage it?
The inverse of what I said earlier. Everyone is scared of the offensive tackle, so those guys don't fly off the board. Josh Simmons has something chronic wrong with his knee, so he doesn't go until the Chiefs at 32 or 31. So then now all the D tackles are pushed up the board. Will Johnson is all a bunch of scare tactics. People aren't scared of his knee at all. He goes off the board. Same thing with Jedi Barron. These running backs don't fly off the board either. It's just Ashton Genty and Omarion Hampton. And then now you're kind of stuck at 30. Even Trey Amos, let's say he goes to the Los Angeles Rams at 26, if I'm not mistaken. They sorely need an outside cornerback as well. So now you're sitting there at 30 like, all the tackles are off the board. The top 4 edges are, because it's all defensive, all defense. I don't feel comfortable with other corners at 30 outside of Trey Amos, ignoring the top 3. That's a disaster scenario to where you may have to take a receiver there, or you have to trade back, and then now your board went a little wonky, and oh Lordy, Bills Mafia is on your head.
I'm with you there. So what I did last night is I kind of tried to make this happen. I pulled out the Pro Football Focus mock draft, and I actually went through, and I was borderline dumb about it. I just gave defensive player after defensive player after defensive player for the most part. The Houston Texans were super excited in my draft. Ended up with Kelvin Banks at tackle late in the draft. So for the most part, I just went defense over and over and over. And when I got to the Bills pick, you know who was still on the board? Derek Harmon. Now, like, I really made an effort to take all the guys off the board. Now, maybe, look, I think there's an argument in here for when you get down to defensive tackle 5 through 12, everybody's got a different flavor. And
right.
Maybe some people might put Harmon in where I had a guy in that someone might have out. Regardless,
right.
The point I'm going to make is I think the worst case scenario for the Bills, the worst case scenario is they still end up with a defensive tackle you can feel all right about. That there's still going to be a guy on the board that you can put on that defensive line. And maybe now, look, some of this is going to be a flavor the Bills prefer. And maybe the guy who's there isn't their type of guy. But I still think there's going to be a very solid, respectable D lineman, whether it's an edge or a tackle, probably a tackle, that you can take in that pick. And yeah, look, you're not going to get your game-changing upside, but you should get a guy that you can plug and play as a starter right off the bat.
That, like I said, these mock draft simulators are all over the place. I saw one today where Ashton Genty went 3rd to the Giants. Lord have mercy, after losing Saquon Barkley, that would be hilarious. but regardless, they're all over the place. And like, for anyone to sit up here and say they know exactly what trends will go which way or another, all I know is that the Cleveland Browns are taking Travis Hunter and Cam Ward is going at 1. Outside of that, I don't know Jack Diddley squad, anything else. And I think Bills fans will still be excited with Derek Harmon coming to Buffalo, even though I do think there is some concern about his ability to play next to Ed Oliver on 1st and 2nd down. I do think that is some concern there, because I don't know how much of an anchor he is in the run game, because he played more 3-tech than 1-tech this year for the Oregon Ducks.
I 100% agree, and I'm not a huge Derek Harmon fan, but the point I'm making is that I don't see a scenario where the Bills end up stuck on someone who's terrible. Maybe not a great fit, maybe a little square peg round hole stuff, but still a guy that's a good player that I think would be ready to go right off the bat. All right, let's talk about our potential surprises for round 1. I'll go first here, and you mentioned him a minute ago. Luther Burden, the receiver. And I think maybe receiver in general might be the pick I go here, because you're right. There is a scenario where edges go early, where guys are afraid of, some of the offensive players. And I don't mind grabbing a receiver. The Bills only really have 4 guys that you can pencil into the depth chart. There's a spot there where you can add someone. And look, if you don't get production out of that guy immediately, it's not the end of the world. Obviously, you'd like that out of your first round pick. But, the Bills have a great roster. They were, 3 points away from making the Super Bowl last year. This isn't a team desperate. You can go long term. And to me, Burden, outside of the elite guys at the top of this draft, your Tet McMillans and your Matthew Goldens, Burden is the guy who I think is the best playmaker left in that first round. A guy who doesn't have elite speed, but has really good speed, great after the catch. At Missouri, they didn't use his skills nearly enough. He was a guy they, targeted behind the line of scrimmage, close to the line of scrimmage, at a ridiculous percentage, to where, most people, and I agree, when you look at what he can do This is a guy that can attack at all three levels of the field. A bit of a head case. So, like, the Bills are going to have to be cool with the idea that he was a diva in college, and they got to be all right with that. But separate of that, I think this is a guy that can bring some electricity. He could be, theoretically, what Curtis Samuel was supposed to be when the Bills shut out a bunch of money for him last year.
Yeah, I think receiver is the most realistic surprise option that they can go. They have glaring holes on the defensive line as well as cornerback too. I know people want to pencil in a safety, and I know national people who maybe aren't as tapped in with the Buffalo Bills see, a hole there and maybe want to pencil in a safety there. For how big of a fan I am of Malachi Starks, and I love him. I've been watching him since he was a true freshman at the University of Georgia. I just don't believe the Bills would take a safety in the first round, but considering they will lose value on Cole Bishop already without even giving him the runway to go win that job. So it says more about how they want to give Cole Bishop a chance to earn that job as opposed to maybe how they feel about Malachi Starks. So I think the only realistic surprise scenario here would be receiver, because they're set everywhere else on offense in terms of their depth chart. But yeah, I think Luther Burden can be an option there. I know some people, when you look at the rankings, Emeka Ibuka is up there, but he doesn't really fit in terms of
they don't need a slot receiver.
In terms of adding something different to the offense. Emeka Ibuka may not be the greatest down the field option, but in terms of just giving that man the ball and letting him cook, he did that a lot in Missouri. And I will say this, he put up 1,000+ yards as a sophomore in the SEC. That usually lends to a player being pretty darn good in the National Football League. But you're not lying, though. This past year at Missouri, to put it respectfully, his quarterback play wasn't that good.
No, and look, it doesn't excuse the way he reacted to it, but you're right. The Missouri passing offense in general was pretty depressed to where you'd understand a drop in production. But is receiver also the surprise pick for you in round one, or you got something different?
No, it has to be receiver. Like every other position, like I saw someone say linebacker today, respectfully, no. So like it will be receiver. I still can't wrap my mind to thinking that Brandon Beane will take a safety in round one.
And look, the other thing about the safeties too, I don't think there's anybody available late round one or even in round one that blows me away enough to where I'm gonna cause that personnel problem or that roster build problem, on my team. If there's a ridiculous, if Kyle Hamilton's in this draft, then sure, we'll figure it out, Yeah. But with the guys available, no. The one thing I will say about linebacker, because the Bills redid Matt Milano's contract in a way that makes him available after this year, I don't think it's ridiculous to connect the Bills with a linebacker. I think what is ridiculous, though, is that if it ain't Jahad Campbell, they not picking no one in the first round, because Carson Schweschinger is the most Carson Schweschinger linebacker you can ever find. Like, he's not wowing anybody. And he's the number 2 linebacker in this, arguably the number 2 linebacker in this class. That is not a first round pick. Maybe round 2, round 2, but not round 1. All right, let's move it to round 2 here with the 2 picks. And again, let's start the same way. Best case scenario for you in your mind with the Bills in round 2.
Best case scenario, let's say that they go defensive line, or in this world, best case scenario, they get their defensive lineman of their choice at 30. For some odd reason, the cornerback run doesn't happen until like 45. And then you're able to pick from, let's say, 1 out of 6 guys at your 56 pick. And I think that's where you can get some value there, because I kind of think in real life this run is going to happen in the 30s. But for whatever reason, they choose receivers over corners. Best case scenario, you are able to get a corner at 56 that, hey, there's some toolsy guys there that you can take at 56. Hey, there's some guys who are maybe more pro-ready that you can plug and play a little bit. Get your pick of the litter between 2 or 3 guys at 56, and I think the Bills will be pretty happy.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on this, and this is going to kind of be a discussion point for the next 2 categories with me. For me, though, my best case scenario for the Bills is whatever they do in round 1, you walk away from round 2 or day 2 by filling your top 3 needs with a corner, an interior defensive lineman, and an edge. And you don't ridiculously reach in any of them. There are a lot of combos that work for me. The one I happened to write down was Mike Green, like I said, trade up for him in round 1, and then Trey Amos and Alfred Collins in round 2. And you can sell me on any number of combos. As long as the Bills fill those 3 needs with guys who we feel are respectable, that to me is the A1 scenario, coming out of this draft, that you'll be able to say to your defense, I've got 3 young guys. I feel good about upside. I'm also plugging needs. I've restocked for the future. That to me is checking every box when you come out of the first 3 rounds. Let me move it right to the worst case scenario here. We keep talking about this because it's still the same topic. For me, the worst case scenario is missing out on a corner. And when I look at this, the more I study it, the more I wonder if the Bills can even afford to not go corner in round one. Because I'm totally with you. I think the run on corner is going to happen between 30 and 45. And the idea that an Amos or a Revel or one of those guys are going to drop to even 56, I don't think is likely, to where maybe Brandon Beane has to trade up. So we're not going to sit here and entertain, too many trades in round two. But if the Bills somehow walk away, and I know you like Noah Williams and you like Porter more than I do. To me, Porter's a nice idea of a corner.
Oh, liking Porter. Hold on.
Yeah.
Pause on Porter.
Yeah. Go ahead.
He is a toolsy player that brings stuff to the table, but
Yes.
I would not feel comfortable taking him in the second round. That is not a second round.
Okay. All right, good. So we're with you there. But so the point is, if you don't like Porter, then I don't remember the number off the top of my head. We're talking about 6 guys who are better than him, right? And depending on who you ask, more or less. So, 2 or 3 are going to go round one at minimum. If the Bills lose out on the other 3 because they all go high in round 2, which I think is a concern, that to me is the worst case scenario. And I don't even care who you end up with at edge and tackle, because we just discussed the fact that those guys have a lot of question marks attached to them. And look, I like Trey White, and I think Trey White can still be an effective starter in this league. I like Dane Jackson more than most people do. But rolling into the season with those 2 guys and a day 3 corner, man, I would be nervous heading into training camp.
Nah, I wouldn't like that one iota either. And I know that some people will say, hey, they have CB2 filled with Dane and / or Trey White. You can afford to take a more toolsy guy or take a
developmental guy.
A Darian Porter or like a Zoff Frazier from UTSA, one of those guys. I still like guys who can play. Like, and no disrespect to Darian Porter, he's still forget him being toolsy. He's 24. He didn't play until he was his 6th year at Iowa State, and then even this last year he didn't start. He rotated. So there are red flags all over the dang place. You ain't got to search too far to be out on Darian Porter, and that's why I don't have him at 56, 62. I'm happy we cleared that up, by the way. I ain't want you to come into the draft on Thursday to Carl, I love to do. No, he don't. No, he don't. Having said all of that, though, I think that is valid as well. I think another, if we want to go worst case scenario for me that I thought of, with those first 3 picks, so let's say 2 of those guys are defensive linemen.
Mm-hmm.
Neither of those guys
guaranteed. Go ahead. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
With 2 out of those 3 picks, neither of those guys project to be high-level pass rushers. I think that would be a worst case scenario as well, because I see a lot of people say, well, the Bills need to get a stuffing one tech. They need a guy who can help defend the run. You know who the guys who are beating up on the Bills, right? Joe Burrow, Pat Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, yada, yada, yada. How does a run stuffing guy help that on 3rd down in the 4th quarter? It don't happen. You know where you get your run stuffing technique who doesn't project to be a pass rusher? You get him on day 3 of the draft who can play on 1st and 2nd down. The Bills need guys up front who can go get after the pass rusher. And I know they got Joey Bosa this year. If he's healthy and that works out, all glory to them. But you need a guy who has some upside going forward. Because if you take a guy like an Alfred Collins and then another defensive end guy you draft doesn't have the tools to be an S tier or an A tier guy, cool, you upgraded your run defense from like 16th to 8th. Can you still take down Patrick Mahomes in the postseason? That's the problem that we're left with right now. So I think I've been waiting to get that off my chest for months now, because where I turn, the Bills need to fix their run defense. They do, but your number one issue is the fact that Joe Burrow and Pat Mahomes been cooking them like chefs in the postseason.
And that's another reason why I moved off the idea of Kenneth Grant being the A1 best case scenario in round 1, because what's the value there? Even if he hits, he's not a guy that's going to probably be a pocket destroyer. He's going to be okay, a pain in the neck, someone who can push the pocket a little bit, but he's not. Look, Patrick Mahomes is not rolling into the game against Kenneth Grant thinking, man, we got to block that big fat guy up the middle. They'll be fine with him. So I think going edge, makes a lot of sense, and getting pass rush juice is a need for sure. What's your surprise potential for the Bills with either of those round 2 picks?
See, it's all subjective for surprise here. I think that receiver is definitely in play here. I think safety is 100% in play here. I wasn't thinking about linebacker, but now that you mention it, I would not be surprised if they get enamored by one of these toolsier guys. I know Chris Paul has a little bit of juice to him. Chris Paul Jr. out of Ole Miss, not the basketball player, y'all. Trust me, he is on his way out to NBA. But one of those positions could get taken in round 2. The problem is offensively, their depth chart is set across the board. So it's hard to see outside of receiver, to see any surprises there. Like, you have Ryan Vandermark as your backup swing tackle. You have your backup offensive guard. You remember you took Sev Van Prank Granger last year in the 5th or 6th round. So, like, you don't want to just keep throwing resources at that.
And
So if I had
Tyler Grable too is still there at tackle also. So yeah.
Alec Anderson's on the roster. So
Yeah.
if I had to say my surprises, and I don't want to like steal any of your thunder, but it would be receiver, linebacker, safety, and especially a reach for a guy that you maybe projected on in round 4.
Let me throw a theory at you, and
Mhm.
you can totally tell me that there's no way this is happening. Because frankly, I've had this theory thrown at me on social media, and I've kind of said, no way, it ain't going to happen. But the more I think about it, the more I think it's at least worth discussing. Running back. Here's the argument, okay?
Mhm.
If the Bills are intimidated, nervous, concerned enough about James Cook's contract stance, you have a really deep running back group. Now, I think there's a good argument for you can grab a running back any year, and I believe in that. And I haven't dove into the 2026 running back class to say this one's way better than next year. But we know that this class is really good, especially between, picks 30 and picks 90 or so.
Right.
If the Bills fell in love with one of those guys, you got 2 options. One, you could just cut bait with Ray Davis and say, you know what, I don't think he's got it, and move on. I don't see why they would do that. He was good enough last year. But you could also trade James Cook high with the argument that Ray Davis is a guy that we count on to step in. And this rookie we just drafted, we love so much that if he's our third back, he's okay. Because with Tyler Johnson as your 2, at worst case, you got a guy you trust on third down, you trust in the 2-minute, you trust as a receiver. Now you've got 2 other guys, Ray Davis and Rookie X, who you could plug into either the first or the third role. You just let them play it out in camp. You get whatever you get for James Cook in trade. And look, it won't be a 3rd or 2nd round pick, but you get something for the guy.
Right.
And you move forward without having someone who's unhappy with his contract. You don't lose him for nothing theoretically next year. And I don't count pick, whatever. I don't want to hear about that. It's a running back. He ain't getting paid that much.
Right.
Don't get me wrong. Like, look, this is a surprise category. That would sure as bleak be a surprise. But I don't think it's 100% ridiculous based in large part on what this class is going to bring at running back.
I'm so happy you brought this up, because if you would have asked me the same question 2 months ago, I'd have been like, yeah, no way, Jose. The one reason why I wouldn't think it's the worst idea in the world, and quite frankly, I'd be like, oh, hey, talk me through it, depending on the prospect, yada, yada, yada. I still don't think they franchise tag him next year, because the franchise tag is I believe is all guaranteed, so you can't do any funny money with it. I still don't believe
you can get out of that now. So you can franchise. Well, no, I'm sorry, I was thinking 5th-year option. No, franchise. You're right. Strike that from the record. Continue.
And so it's top 5 money because he made the Pro Bowl. So since he made the Pro Bowl, that 5th-year option is going to be, that franchise tag, is going to be the top 5 money at his position. So you're paying him $13 million a year. I don't think the Bills value him like that. They didn't use him like that on the field. So why would they value him like that on the franchise tag? So I think this is his last year in Buffalo regardless. So do you really want to roll into 2026 with Ray Davis and then a bunch of who knows what? I don't think it's crazy to go that way, but that's something that I hadn't thought about, and I wouldn't be like, you got to talk me through it a little bit for sure.
Yeah, I think that the big thing is you have to be, for the Bills, you have to be kind of locked into, we're not paying James Cook what he wants, so we're going to move on either this year or next year. And then you got to say, I like this running back class or whoever's available to me at 56 or 62 way more than what I think is coming down the road next year when I would be forced to replace him, or even what's on the free agent market. Again, a surprise. I don't think it happens, but not totally ridiculous. All right, I want to close this with a little bit of a trade or no trade lightning round. You don't have to just do 1-word answers, but I don't want to dive too deep into this either. Yep. Give me your percentage chance Brandon Beane makes a trade, either direction, in round 1.
I will put it at 68%.
Yeah, I started at 30, and the more I thought about it, the thing for me is, because I think the Bills might be one of the few teams that want to go up, I think there'll be a lot of teams wanting to sell. So I think there's an opportunity to make a trade there. And then at the other end, I could see a team wanting to come back into the first round to get a quarterback late. So I'm going to go like 53% for a trade. If Brandon Beane does make a trade in round 1, more likely they go up or down?
Up. I think there are some teams. The Vikings are going to trade back. They have 4 picks. There's no way in hell they bring 4 rookies onto their roster this year. They're trading back. I think there'll be a prime candidate to go get them and go give them some more picks. Vikings, I mentioned the Broncos earlier as well. Those are two spots that I'm going to be looking at come Thursday.
100% agree. I think up is the move. I think people have talked about the idea of the Bills sending the Vikings 2 fourth-round picks to move up. That is a price that would be easily agreeable, I think, to both sides of that trade. If the Bills make a trade up, is it big or small, with the dividing line here being 5 spots or more? Because remember, the Brandon Beane trade ups the last few years have been like 2 picks, 1 pick. It hasn't been a big jump. Do they make a big jump this year if they make a trade?
I'm going to call my shot and say people are actually scared of Will Johnson's knee. So it's going to be a big one to the Broncos at 20. I think people are – I got a feeling they're scared of his knee. So I think Will Johnson at 20.
To me, there are not enough great prospects to think it's worth the Bills trading up 2 spots. If there is a move to be made, to me, it has to be big. I think the Vikings at 24 is the floor.
You're my bad. I don't know why I went to the Broncos. That's 6 picks. My bad.
Yes. 6 picks. Yeah.
Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. So to me, that's kind of why I drew the line at 5, because I think to me 24 is an easy move, and I don't think the Bills make a move after 24. If they don't get on the clock before 25, I think they just sit in 30 and take whoever falls to them, because I don't think anybody is worth it to move up 2 spots. Now, look, the Bills could overpay. I just don't think that happens. All right, man. Anything else? Round 1, anything lying around in your head here you want to get out before? Any shots you want to call beyond the ones we already have called here?
Nah, man. Like I said, I do want to preface this. I'm not rooting on Will Johnson, need to be bad or anything like that. You know, I'm just saying, based off the reports I've seen, there are some issues with cartilage and things like that, and that C word is never good. So obviously, I have no idea how the Bills feel about his medicals. I'm sure they are privy to his information, but I've seen that of late. And usually, when there's smoke about a guy's medicals, it's usually fire as well. That is ignoring character concerns. That is not with him, but other players. So if I had to call my shot, Will Johnson, who was projected to be a top 5 pick coming into this college football season, drops to, let's say, the Broncos pick, and someone goes to get him, whether it's the Buffalo Bills or the Packers or whoever the case may be.
If the Bills come out of this draft with Will Johnson, despite all of what you just said, I don't even care what they do with the other 9 picks. That would be a fantastic draft, because what a player that would be to fill a huge need. All right, as always, you can check out Let's Talk Ball at rochesterfirst.com or at WIVB.com. At Rochester First, you click on the sports tab, you go to 8 Sports Extra. We're also on YouTube and wherever you find your podcasts. Good chance we get together next week to kind of recap it, talk about who the Bills got, what we liked, what we didn't like. We'll see you again then. For Carl Jones, I'm Thad Brown. Thanks as always for watching Let's Talk Ball.